This is part 2 of how to make Bob-omb. Let's start with making his eyes. Grab your white yarn and make a slip knot. Attach it to your hook and chain 9 stitches. Now that we have a chain of 9, we are going to place 2 single crochets in the second chain from the hook. 1 single crochet and 2 single crochet. Now let's grab our stitch marker and mark the very first of those 2 single crochets. Let's return to our work and we're going to do 6 single crochets down the chain. I'm going to speed up my work here a little and I'll meet you once you have done all 6 single crochets. We have reached the final chain, and in this last chain we're going to place 4 single crochets. We will now begin to work up the other side of the chain. We will start with 6 single crochets into each of the next 6 chains. And let's meet back once you've completed those 6 single crochets. In this final chain of the round, we're going to place 2 single crochets. Once done, we have completed the first round and we will have 20 single crochets in total, and we can move on to round 2. At this point, I will remove my stitch marker and place my stitch marker back into the final stitch that I've just created, and let's start the next round. For round 2, we're going to start with 2 single crochets into the next 2 stitches. Let's now do a single crochet into each of the next 6 stitches. In the next 4 stitches, we're going to do 2 single crochets into each of those stitches. Similar to earlier, we're going to do 6 single crochets into these next 6 stitches. In the final 2 stitches of this round, let's place 2 single crochets into each of those stitches. You should now have 24 stitches in round 2 in total. That's us completed the eye. We're now going to cut our yarn, but we want to leave a very long tail in order for us to be able to use that yarn to sew onto the body. Pull your yarn all the way through your final stitch to close your work. Rewind to the beginning of this chapter and make a second eye because we want your bob-omb to be able to see. Let's make the fuse. For that, you will need some orange yarn, some yellow yarn, and some white yarn. We'll start with the orange yarn. So make a slip knot and attach that to your hook and chain 2 stitches. On the second chain from your hook, we're going to insert 6 single crochets into the same hole each time, and that will complete round 1. Place your stitch marker in the last stitch that you created, and if a hole has formed in the center of your work, give your yarn tail a little tug in order to close it. For round 2, we're going to be placing a single crochet into each of the stitches of round 1. However, we're going to do this on the back loops only of the stitches. So push your hook through the center of each stitch and grab the back loop, as this is where we're going to do each of the single crochets. At the end of this round, you'll still have 6 stitches. Let's meet back just before you do the last yarn over on the very last stitch of this round, as we're going to perform a colour change. This is now the last stitch of round 2. So push your hook through, yarn over and pull through, and then you'll have 2 loops on your hook. Grab your yellow yarn and attach it to your hook, and pull the yarn through both of the loops, as this will perform the colour change. We're going to continue in the yellow. Grab your stitch marker and mark the last stitch of round 2. We'll pause for a moment whilst we cut the orange yarn, as we're no longer needing that. Pick up your work again, and we're going to push out the centre. As we did the back loops only of round 2, it means that we have created a flat top for round 1, and we've started creating a cylinder for the fuse. We're just going to continue making that cylinder longer. So let's start round 3. Round 3 is very straightforward. We're going to start with doing a single crochet into the next stitch. As we've got some yarn tails hanging about, I like to try and incorporate them into my work to secure them a little bit better. So I place them over my hook, but yarn over with my working yarn and continue my stitch with my working yarn. That just holds the tails in place. Continue round 3 with just doing single crochets into each of the 6 stitches. Let's begin round 4. Round 4 is just single crochets again, all the way around. This is also the last round that we'll be using the yellow yarn. When you get to your final stitch, pause before you complete it, and we will do the colour change to white. This is the final stitch of round 4. So yarn over and pull through until you've got the 2 loops on your hook. And then grab your white yarn and place that over your hook and pull the white yarn through both loops to perform the colour change. Let's replace the stitch marker in the last stitch that we created and pause again whilst we take a moment to cut the yellow yarn. Pick up your work again and continue with round 5. Similar to the last colour change, we've got these extra yarn ends that are hanging about. So when you push your hook through the first stitch, you will then want to grab your yarn ends and place them on top of your hook before continuing making your first single crochet using your working yarn. So with the working yarn, yarn over and pull only the working yarn through the stitch and through both loops. Continue round 5 with doing single crochets all the way around. We'll continue having 6 stitches at the end of this round. And we're going to continue making the fuse longer by just doing single crochets for rounds 5 all the way through to and including round 10. Let's meet back at the end of round 10. Great! With round 10 complete, we can now cut our working yarn. You want to keep a long tail so we can use that to sew the fuse onto Bob-omb later. Pull your yarn tail all the way through your final stitch. Let's deal with these other yarn ends. Rather than stuffing our fuse with polyester stuffing, we can use these yarn ends and just poke them into the fuse itself. Great, that's the fuse complete. We can set that aside and start working on the fuse holder. For the fuse holder that sits on top of the Bob-omb body, grab your blue yarn and make a slip knot. Attach your slip knot to your hook and chain 2 stitches. In the second chain from your hook, we're going to place 6 single crochets into the same hole each time. And at the end of round 1, you'll have 6 stitches. With round 1 complete, let's grab our stitch marker and place the stitch marker in the last stitch we created. If a hole is forming in the centre of your work, give your yarn tail a little tug to close it, and we can now move on to round 2. For round 2, we're going to do an increase into each of the 6 stitches of round 1. By that I mean we're going to do 2 single crochets into each of the 6 stitches. At the end of round 2 you will have 12 stitches. Replace your stitch marker, give your yarn tail a little tug, and let's start round 3. Round 3 we will be doing 1 single crochet followed by an increase, and we'll do that for the entirety of the round. By the end of round 3 you will have 18 stitches. For round 4, we will do 2 single crochets followed by an increase, and we'll do that for the entirety of the round. By the end of round 4, you will have 24 stitches. Now for round 5. Round 5 is the last of our increasing rounds, and for this round we're going to do 3 single crochets followed by an increase for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 5 we will have 30 stitches. Round 6 now, and we're just going to be doing single crochets for the entirety of this round. However, we're going to do the single crochets in the back loops only for each of those stitches. So take your hook and place it through the center of your first stitch and grab your yarn and make your first single crochet, and repeat this all the way round. We're doing this in order to create a flat surface on the top of the fuse holder. Round 7 is our last round, and for this we will do single crochets for the entirety of the round. There is no need to worry about the back loops, we're just going to be doing normal single crochets. That's our fuse holder complete. Because we did those back loops only on round 6, you can see that we've made a very short cylinder shape and have a very flat top across the top of the fuse holder. We can now cut our working yarn and leave a long tail so we can use that later for sewing the fuse holder onto the Bob-omb body. Pull your yarn all the way through your last stitch in order to secure it, and there you have it, your fuse holder. Let's make the wind-up key for your Bob-omb. Grab your yellow yarn and create a slip knot. Attach the slip knot onto your hook and chain 16 stitches. Now that we have a chain of 16, we're wanting to fold that in half. making sure that we don't twist the chain. And we're going to place our hook through the center of the first chain that we created, so that we have 2 loops on our hook. Yarn over with our working yarn and pull the working yarn through both loops to make a circle. Grab your stitch marker and place it in the chain closest to your hook. I'm going to take a moment to untangle myself here. For round 2, we're going to be working that into the top layer of the chain. And we'll be doing a single crochet followed by an increase for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 2, you'll have 24 stitches. Attach your stitch marker into the last stitch you created, and let's start round 3. Round 3 is a lot easier as we can now see the stitches we're going to be working from. For round 3, we're going to do 2 single crochets followed by an increase, and we're going to do that for the entirety of the round. By the end of the round, you will have 32 stitches. Round 4 is wonderfully straightforward. We're just going to be doing single crochets for the entirety of the round. And at the end of the round, we'll continue to have 32 stitches. For round 5, I would like you to do a single crochet for the next 26 stitches. And then let's meet back and I will explain what to do with the final 6 stitches of this round. So there's 6 stitches left on round 5. And what we're going to do is do a single crochet in the front loops only of each of those 6 stitches. So place your hook through the center of each stitch and grab the front loop and make your single crochet, and keep repeating this through all 6 stitches. You'll see, because we used the front loops only for those 6 stitches, that we've left the back loops available for us to use later. This is what we're going to use to sew the key onto Bob-omb's body. For round 6, we're back to doing single crochets for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 6, you will have 32 stitches in total. For round 7, we will start decreasing. We're going to do 2 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease. When it comes to the invisible decrease, we want to do that using the back loops only. So continue round 7 doing 2 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease using the back loops only. And at the end of round 7, you will have 24 stitches. Round 8 is our final round for this key. We're going to do a single crochet followed by an invisible decrease, and we'll do that for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 8, you will have 16 stitches. Let's meet back at the end of this round and I'll show you how to sew together your key. Perfect, that's us created one part of the key, and you'll see that it naturally curves in on itself and creates this donut shape. Grab your scissors and cut a very long tail of your yarn in order for us to be able to use this to sew our key together and then sew it onto our bob-omb. Pull the yarn all the way through your final stitch to secure. We're now ready to pick up our yarn needle and sew so that the centre of our donut is connected. Once we've done that, we'll feed our yarn all the way through to those 6 stitches we left visible when we created round 5. Also, as a quick reminder, we need to have 2 key parts, so rewind back to the beginning of this chapter and create a second one. Let me show you how to close up the centre of the key. Attach your yarn to your yarn needle. And all we're going to do is attach the top layer of the key to the bottom layer of the key using the last rounds of each of those layers. So grab the first stitch of the top layer and the corresponding stitch from the bottom layer and pull your yarn all the way through. I then pull my needle through the center of my work before I start making the next stitch. And you'll continue doing this for all 16 stitches in the center of the key. There's no need to stuff it as we want the key to remain flat. Once you've closed up the center of your key, we want to pull our yarn all the way through to those 6 stitches we left exposed in round 5, as this will be our starting point when we sew the key onto the back of Bob-omb. Now we have made all of the elements for Bob-omb and we can start sewing them onto him. We're going to start with the eyes. I place the top of the eyes between rounds 10 and 11, and then I have about 5 stitches between each of them. Once they're pinned in place, we can begin to sew. To sew them onto the body, I grab a piece of his body, pull my needle all the way through, and then on the eye, I'm only grabbing the furthest away loop, so the back stitch, as I'm wanting the eyes to stick out a little bit from the body. So continue to do this all the way around both eyes in order to attach the eyes to Bob-omb. Let me quickly grab one I prepared earlier, and you'll see that the eyes are sticking out a little bit from his body. This is the look we're going for. Once you've attached both eyes to Bob-omb, I will show you how to attach the fuse holder and the fuse. Now that the eyes are attached, we can now attach the fuse holder. To attach the fuse holder, we will use the stitches of the very last round. We're going to line up the top of the fuse holder with the center top part of Bob-omb. We do this as they're both the same size and it's easier to match up. So gently place your fuse holder on top of his head and start pinning it in place. We can now start sewing the fuse holder onto Bob-omb using the final stitches of round 7 of the fuse holder. Sew until you have done about 3/4 of those stitches and then stop, as we're going to need a gap in order to start stuffing the fuse holder. We don't want too much stuffing when we get to that stage, as we want to maintain a flat top to the fuse holder, but we want to give it enough stability for us to have a platform to sew on our fuse. Go ahead and start sewing around until you've got to about 3/4 of the way round, and then stop, and I'll show you just how much stuffing you need. Perfect, I've got 3/4 of the way round, so I can remove the final pin as it's very secure, and I now still have a gap in order to be able to stuff. Grab your toy stuffing and start stuffing the fuse holder. We don't need too much, as we're wanting to maintain a flat top across the fuse holder, and a solid platform to be able to support and sew on the fuse. Once you are happy with the amount of toy stuffing you have in your fuse holder, you can continue sewing and closing up that remaining gap. Once you're done, you can weave in the ends, and now we're ready to attach the fuse. Sewing your fuse onto your Bob-omb is very straightforward. Grab your fuse, and if you turn it upside down, you'll remember that we have 6 stitches on the final round of the fuse. This matches with the 6 stitches of the first round of your fuse holder. So place your fuse on the very center of your fuse holder and pin it in place. Now you can sew your fuse onto your fuse holder. Now that the fuse is attached, let's move on to attaching his feet. You'll remember that when we closed up our foot, we pulled our yarn about 1/3 of the way through the foot. This is the back of the foot, and then this is the front of the foot. Place both the feet down and make this beautiful V shape. Grab your Bob-omb and place him directly on top of the feet. We're going to pin the feet in place and make sure that we maintain this V shape to keep him balanced. Let me grab one I made earlier, and you'll see that I sew his feet onto his body, and I also sew his feet together to give him extra stability. So go ahead and sew your feet onto your Bob-omb, and then let's meet back and I'll show you how to sew his key onto the back of his body. This is the last part of the project. With his feet nicely secure, we can move on to attaching his key. You should have created 2 key parts. Let's have a quick look at this one first. When we closed up the center, we pulled our working yarn all the way through to these 6 exposed stitches on round 5. This is what we're going to use to sew the key onto his body. Place the first key part onto the back of his body, centralizing it between his feet and his fuse, and pin it in place. Grab your second part, again looking for those exposed stitches from round 5, and place that against the back of his body, straight under the first one, again pinning them in place. We want to sew those 6 exposed stitches to the back of Bob-omb on each of the keys. And once you've done that, you'll want to also sew together both of the key parts. In this example, you'll see that a lot clearer. Here, I've attached the key parts to the back of Bob-omb, and then I've sewn them together. It looks much better this way, so go ahead and sew on the key to the back of Bob-omb. Perfect, that's us finished making Bob-omb. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you'll join me next time for a new project.